Australia, and South Africa into giant mega colonies that were sort of based on the United States. The regional governments became provinces or states, and the general government, headed by the Governor General at the top of the colonial pyramid, became a democratically run national or federal government. And the federal government would feature a new federal parliament, and the Governor General would appoint members of that parliament to his executive council, which became known as the Federal Cabinet. All right, is this all making sense so far? The head of the Governor General's Executive Council became known as the Prime Minister. And in short order, the power of the Prime Minister made the Governor General an increasingly unimportant figure in the political system. Once a colony became fully self-governing, the British didn't really need to work through a governor anymore. They could just boss around the Prime Minister directly, if it came to that. Accordingly, in time, the office of Governor General became little more than a patronage position where the Brits could stick like a cousin of the king or some British politician or a British military guy to reward them for their service or even pad their resume. Here's a quote from the Scottish author Goldwin Smith, describing the nature of the Governor General of Canada in 1891. The practical aim of a Governor General is social popularity combined with political peace. So long as he simply gives way in everything to the politicians, he will have a quiet course, and at the end of it, he will go away amidst general plaudits with the reputation of having governed Canada well. He is then qualified in the eyes of the home government for a higher post. And this got so tacky that soon the Brits stopped appointing Governor Generals to their white dominions at all. They instead allowed the governments of those places to pick one of their own people for the job. The first of these being an Australian judge with the wonderful name of Isaac Isaacs. He became the first non-British person to be appointed Governor General of a British colony in 1931. And this outsourcing of responsibility for appointing the Governor Generals became one of the final colonial cords that Britain cut with these places, which were by now functioning as pretty much completely independent countries. But what about the rest of the empire? Well, there was a time when the British thought that they could export the Canadian, Australian, South African model of gradual democracy to some of their other colonies as well. But the British were also much more cautious and condescending about introducing self-rule into the non-white parts of their empire. And as a result, it took them a very long time to even get around to introducing phase one of this whole system. And by the time they did, it was like the mid-20th century and the locals were not terribly interested in playing along. In colonies like India and the Gold Coast, the nationalist elites of those places demanded complete independence as soon as possible, not stage-managed Canadian-style democracy under some indefinite period of British supervision. And so the traditional narrative is that the Brits ultimately had no choice except to bow to the pressure and just abruptly abandoned all of their colonies beginning in the late 1940s. And the independence leaders, for their part, agreed to adopt some pretty slapped-together interim constitutions based on the British colonial government system rather than delay independence any further. In 1947, India and Pakistan became the first non-white British colonies to gain independence, followed in 1957 by the Gold Coast, now known as Ghana. Now, during the colonial times, India-Pakistan did not have a Governor General. The head of their colonial government was known as a Viceroy, and the Gold Coast just had a plain governor. But after independence, both of these men had their official job title changed to Governor General. And this was important because it signaled a fundamental change in the understanding of what a Governor General was. From henceforth, under the English system of government, a Governor General was no longer a colonial administrator of a large general government, but rather a purely figurehead position in an independent country. And this pattern repeated in pretty much every country that the British granted independence to in the 20th century. Upon independence, the top-ranking British colonial person became a Governor General, and shortly thereafter he resigned and was replaced by a native-born Governor General. And what usually happened after that was that the title of the Governor General was then changed to President, which was seen as more appropriate for an independent country, or the position was just abolished as a pointless relic of British rule. Okay, so that brings us to today. Today, there are 15 countries in this world that still have a governor general, and they are the original white settler colonies, Canada, Australia, and the Australian offshoot, New Zealand. 3 Pacific nations around Australia, Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, and Tuvalu, the Central American nation of Belize, and 8 countries in the former British Caribbean. Broadly speaking, the countries that use the Governor General system today are ones that had a relatively peaceful transition from British colonial rule. They also tend to be places where there is some high degree of affinity for British traditions and culture and customs. In some cases, it may also just represent a kind of post-independence political expediency that no one was ever able to come up with a better alternative to. A few countries, like Sierra Leone and Sri Lanka, stuck with the Governor General system for quite a while, not because they had any great affinity for it, but because they just couldn't come up with a better replacement system. Alright, so enough history. Let us talk about the Governor Generals of today. Well, in most cases, they all work more or less the same. In fact, when you read the constitutions of the 15 Governor General countries, it seems pretty clear that a lot of them just copy and pasted their sections of what the Governor General does. Of the 15 countries, only 2 of them elect the Governor General, the Solomon Islands and Papua New Guinea, where the position is chosen by Parliament. In every other country, their constitution just says that their Governor General shall be appointed by Her Majesty and shall hold office during Her Majesty's pleasure, which in practice means that the Governor General is just appointed by the Prime Minister of the country. Since Her Majesty, in this case Queen Elizabeth, does not do anything unless the Prime Minister tells her to, though this is itself still controversial because it means that even in these 15 independent countries, the British monarch still technically holds some power over them. But anyway, what sort of person gets hired by a prime minister to be a governor general? Well, at one time, they were often retired politicians, but that became controversial, so these days they are often accomplished people from some non-political, non-controversial profession. The current Governor General of New Zealand, for instance, is a woman with a background in the glamorous world of corporate governance reform. The Governor General of Barbados is a former ambassador and judge, which I think is more typical. The Governor Generals of Jamaica and the Solomon Islands are both retired clergymen, which I guess is not seen as very controversial in those very religious countries. And the Governor General of Canada is a former astronaut. She has been making the news a fair bit recently because she is apparently a very cruel boss who subjects her staff to humiliating pop quizzes about the names of all the planets. This business about the Governor Generals holding office at Her Majesty's pleasure also means that Governor Generals basically get to hang around for as long as they want. The Solomon Islands is the only country where they have strict term limits. Everywhere else they just generally serve for about 5 or 6 years and then retire when they're ready. Sometimes they do get pretty comfy though. The recent Governor General of St. Lucia, Dame Perlouet Louisi, served for an incredible 20 years from 1997 to 2017. And why might they want to hang around for that long? Well, being Governor General seems like a pretty cushy job most of the time. You get to live in a big colonial mansion and basically just do ceremonial stuff. Officially, the Governor General is still mandated to represent the Queen, which means do the kind of ceremonial things that she might do if she was around, like visit schools and hospitals and give speeches at the dedication of new war memorials and that sort of thing. In Caribbean countries, I've noticed a lot of the female Governor Generals even put a lot of effort into dressing like the Queen, with big hats and brightly colored suits. Governor Generals are also supposed to do all of these ceremonial duties that international diplomatic protocol dictates must be done by the head of state, like open the Olympics or greet foreign dignitaries at the airport. This has led to some debate as to whether a Governor General actually is the head of state of their country, or if they are just someone who acts as the head of state on behalf of Queen Elizabeth, the true head of state. This is a very thrilling discussion, as you might imagine. Now, the Governor Generals do have some political powers, but they are very restricted. About 99% of what they are allowed to do can only be done on the explicit instruction of the Prime Minister or his cabinet. So, for example, a Governor General signs bills into law, but only the bills that the Prime Minister has told her to sign. This passage from the Constitution of Belize is pretty typical. In the exercise of his functions, the Governor General shall act in accordance with the advice of the Cabinet or a minister, except in cases where he is required by this Constitution or any other law to act in accordance with